What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, and the overall markets. I'm going to break down what's going on with the economic calendar moving forward. Talk about some very, very important factors out there and how things are looking, in my personal opinion, for the charts. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Webull link. If you deposit any amount of money, you're guaranteed to 12 free stocks. If you deposit $500, you're guaranteed 20 in total. And deposit $2,000 or more, and you're guaranteed 40. The offer ends very soon, in just about 1 day from now. It ends tomorrow, so check it out before they run out. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with the market. So I just wanted to mention that the market was pushing very nicely after Alphabet's earnings came out. However, we got some GDP numbers. Now the market's starting to slow back down. So it's a very, very wild market, right? You can see SPY reached 583, just under all-time highs during the pre-markets, and now it's starting to dip back down. So let's go over these numbers. Why is the market reacting like this? Well, today is Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. 1 hour before the market is scheduled to open, we just had this data that came out at 8:30 a.m. Basically, the GDP growth rate was at 2.8%. This is below the 3 and 3.3% targets. Also, the GDP price index is at 1.8%. This is also a little bit below what we were expecting when it comes to our 1.9 to 2.5% forecast and consensus targets. When it comes to other data, the GDP sales were a little bit above expectations, which is not bad whatsoever. So very mixed data on GDP. The ADP employment change was at 233,000, so not too bad. So a bigger change in employment than expected, but just know that the GDP numbers were not the strongest, kind of mixed. And that's the reason why the market's not getting the best of reactions right now. So I want to make that very, very clear. That's why the market's reacting the way it is. And that's what's basically causing the market to move in a very, very more dire manner. Going into other factors, just know we had AMD and Alphabet announce their earnings. I'm just going to go over the two main ones. I just want to say that looking at this, Alphabet did relatively well with earnings. They beat on EPS and revenue. Also, YouTube advertising revenue, Google cloud revenue, and then other things were better than expected. And this got investors very, very excited. So this is the reason why we saw Google essentially just pushing and outperforming the markets. So that's the reason why the market saw a nice push yesterday after the market closed. It was Google that was just carrying things very, very well. However, AMD did not do as well. Although they met on EPS and they beat on revenue, I just want to say that overall they didn't do as well when it comes to one factor, and that's the fact that they mentioned that their guidance for Q4 was aligned with expectations, but it still implied a 22% decline in their overall sales and growth compared to what we saw last year. That's the reason why we saw the share price dipping a bit. It wasn't really enough to impress investors. That's having a bigger effect on Nvda and the others. So tech was pumping, hitting new highs, only to slow back down after that. So just be careful as we hit tough resistance. I went over the numbers for some earnings, and then don't forget we had consumer confidence yesterday, and then we have PCE inflationary data tomorrow as well. So we'll see how things go. But with that being said, now let's talk about what's happening with the markets. What is my projection? What is my prediction? And what do I think is going to pan out here? So we pumped very nicely on SPY, right? I was talking about how we do have a tough resistance. However, every time we've hit close to 585 to 584, we have rejected. Like we pumped, rejected, pumped, rejected, pumped, rejected, pumped, and rejected. So even after Google's earnings, I mentioned to you all to be a little bit careful because we did pump a bit, only to reject back down. So we're at 581 because we're failing to hold above that. We're looking for 580 as our potential targets, not to mention 578. So we have these potential lower targets right over here. We pumped very, very nicely, only to start declining. So just keep that in mind, guys. And I do think that there is a risk of us declining a little bit more, depending on if we hold 581 or not. So we have 581.05 as our support at the 20 EMA. If it doesn't hold, we're looking for 580 or 50 EMA. If it does hold, we could attempt to rebound. This may rebound a bit, then start dipping lower, closer to 580. So we'll just have to see how things end up going. But there is that risk of downside on SPY. For ES, we're just completely range bound as well. We're looking at this resistance at 58.80. If we can't hold above 58.67, we're likely going to be dipping all the way down to 58.50. So we're kind of stuck in the middle, going back and forth and back and forth, but there is a risk of us declining back down to 58.50. So watch and see how things end up going for ES. Let me just double check this, Nvda Nvidia is dipping right now, and the reason why it's dipping is because of AMD's earnings, not to mention the GDP numbers. So we were talking about this yesterday. We're actually not really respecting a pennant as we initially suspected. We need to reclaim 140 to turn back up, and if we fail to do that, we're looking for 138.5 as our support at the 50 EMA. If that fails, there could be a bigger decline all the way down to 130. 137. So there is a risk of some downside on Nvidia, especially since we have this unfilled gap at 135. So if we lose 138.5, I think we might be declining all the way down to 135.8 to fill the gap down below. So keep that in mind. We have some downside potential. We'll look at 438.5 as our support just to see if that holds. For Bitcoin, we're rejecting right here of 73,000. We basically have 72,000 as our resistance, and we're likely going to decline down towards 71,000 flat. So there might be a little bit of a dip coming because of the GDP numbers. So just keep that in mind. It was also due to do this after so much upside, so that's not really a surprise. For Tesla, we're declining as well. We attempted to rebound. This is exactly what we predicted yesterday. I said that we're going to be looking for a push for 262 to 265 and watch to see what kind of reaction we get if we do get a decline or not. Because Tesla did have a downtrend right here. So we pumped to 262. Now we're rejecting. So this is at risk of declining. I think we might be approaching our 20 EMA around 255 all over again, if not below that. So look for an attempt to dip a little bit more on Tesla to 255, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. For NQ, we're kind of rejecting right over here. We hit just under 21,000. So 20,800 was my target. We did reach that or became very close to doing so. Now we're declining, and that's after our GDP numbers. So we need to get back above 20,700. Otherwise, we're at risk of coming back down to 20,597, which could favor more downside. Same thing with QQQ. We pumped all the way up to almost new all-time highs near 502, not too far from all-time highs. And then we weren't able to break through that. So I did give you guys a warning to watch to see if you hold above 500. Now we're declining back to 500. We'll see if we can hold above that or not. If not, there's going to be a risk of us coming back down to 498, if not 496. So just keep those levels in mind. As far as Aapl goes, we're consolidating. If we end up losing 231.5 or 231.9, excuse me, we're going to be dipping down to fill this gap towards 231. But for the most part, we're just range bound between the 231s to 235s. So it's just range bound, but there is that risk of us declining just a little bit. For a few more, the IWM Russell 2000 is on a bit of a decline. We need to reclaim 221.2. Otherwise, we're at risk of coming all the way down to 220. And if 220 fails, we have a gap to fill all the way down towards the 218.8 area. So I do see a risk of downside on the IWM. For AMD, AMD is rejecting right over here, looking very, very bearish. This is what's leading semiconductors down. We could be looking for 150 or below as our potential targets. Amazon pumped very, very well to 195, but just be careful at this resistance. 195 is not going to be that easy for Amazon to break, so it might consolidate up here and maybe decline back down. If we end up losing 194, we're looking for 192.8 to 193 is our target. But for now, I just see some shuffling at this resistance. Meta pumped very nicely to about 610, but we're failing to break through that. So we could be declining back down to about 600 flat. We'll see if that holds or not. Otherwise, it's going to decline more. Microsoft pumped very nicely to 440. We got to reclaim 440. If we can't do that, there's going to be a risk of us coming back down to about 437. And then for Google, we pumped very, very nice. So we're still looking bullish. We could be looking for 185 as a potential target. It's going to be pumping more, which could help the market to some extent. But then we have external factors like the GDP numbers, which are slowing us down. So my view of the market is this. I think that there is a risk of us potentially dipping a little bit lower, but then we could get bought back up because of Google. And once again, the market may just enter a nice range going back and forth between supply and demand. So yes, SPY could decline closer to the 580 area, then get bought back up, just continue to trade sideways for now. But just know that that is what we're seeing, at least in the charts thus far. So that being said, guys, I just want to thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have an absolutely spectacular rest of your day. I'll be back with another update in just a couple of hours. Until then, I just appreciate you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you again, and peace out.